Hope. It's a word that carries the weight of the future. It connects us as humans. But hope isn't something that just happens. It's created by people who dare to work for a better world. It's often born out of pain and struggle. It's defiant in the face of violence and injustice. Right Livelihood Laureates remind us that hope isn't passive, it's active.
Hello and welcome to the interview series How to Mobilize Change. My name is Parisa Amiri, and during 4 30-minute interviews we will hear the engaging stories of this year's Right Livelihood Laureates. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Joan Carling. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
And of course, congratulations are in order.
Thank
Welcome.
you.
We're so happy to have you here with us. What was your life like before you became an Indigenous Peoples rights activist?
Okay, my life, what's really clear in my memory was my childhood living in the mountains, in the forest, where especially summertime, we always run to the forest and gather pine cones and seeds and fruits and enjoy nature. So I grew up with that, and ever since I feel like I feel comfortable always in nature. I like hiking, so that's really what I was growing up.
And how do you think your upbringing came to influence your activism and your convictions?
It has a lot to do with it, in a sense that when I feel like nature is being destroyed, it gives me it questions. There's a question in my head, like, why is this happening? Especially when I know that nature is valuable for Indigenous peoples like me, where our culture is very much tied with it, our livelihood, our ways of life, even the way we have reciprocal relations. Like, we need to take care of nature because it's taking care of us. I grew up with that notion also within my family, where my parents make sure that nothing goes to waste. We don't waste anything from nature, and that we always have to also give back. So you just don't take something, you take what you need, but also you try to produce, like planting trees, for example. That's also why we always collect the seeds of the pine trees, because it's going to be planted in the nursery. So if you take wood, you also replace it with planting more.
To preserve and also for future generations.
Yes,
maybe.
Exactly. And of course, that's what I learned when I grew up, that it's actually a way of ensuring that the future generations will also have something to live on.
And what were the early days of your activism like in the Philippines?
Because I was young, right? You feel you're full of energy. It's like the world is open for anything possible. I grew up under martial law, under the Marcos dictatorship in the Philippines, and we're called the martial law babies. And I thought it's normal to just see soldiers roaming around, that it's normal to have a curfew, that it's normal not to protest. But being in college, and I learned that this is not normal. Then I started my activism, joining the students. I became a student leader, and also talking about the rights of students to speak out, to participate in school affairs, and to really question the martial law, how the Philippines is being governed under a dictatorship, that there's no democracy. So that's, for me, that's really where I started my critical thinking. I think that we should not accept what just simple what we see, that it's a normal. We need to question also that these are actually not normal. If we see that people who are not able to speak out, people are not free to move around, or why is it that the local farmers, indigenous peoples, are just thrown out of their land while you allow all these mining and logging companies destroy?
And being able to question these conditions is, of course, the basis for all things that have changed for the better. But where does your conviction come from that you can cause change, do you think?
Yeah, my conviction is coming from my sense of justice. I think people should be treated well, regardless of your culture, regardless of your economic background, regardless of who your parents are. And I've seen that indigenous peoples, especially those in the remote areas, are seen as backward, as savages, that they don't know anything, they're just destroying the environment. That's the kind of narrative that's being shown, which I think is not fair. It's not just, because these people are actually having a simple life and having rich culture and are happy with their lives. Why should we discriminate against them just because they're different? We need to speak out when we see things like this, because every person is valuable. Every person has a dignity.
That is an impulse that we would like more people to have, feeling that impulse. But what drives your commitment today, 30 plus years later, to defend indigenous people's rights?
Because the situation is still the same. I mean, I realized that when I started working in the Cordillera region and starting building a network with indigenous peoples in different places in the country, and then later in Asia, and then globally, the situation is basically the same, that we are driven out of our lands simply because other vested groups want to take over our resources. I've traveled around Asia when I was working with Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, from Cambodia, Thailand, Nepal, India. The situation is the same. And then globally, you go to Brazil, Colombia, Kenya, Tanzania, it's the same. And so it's important for us, as indigenous peoples, to really come together and build our solidarity and work together, because of that common struggle that we have, we also find strength in each other, and we understand each other. We respect each other.
And how did your work actually grow from the national to international context?
Yeah.
What inspired that shift?
When I was working in the Cordillera, Philippines, we're already part of a regional network of indigenous peoples in Asia. It's the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. So at that time, I'm already attending conferences, workshops, and even going internationally, attending UN meetings to amplify our voices, because we feel like we've not been heard in our own countries. So then they asked me to lead the organization, the Asia Indigenous Peoples, because they said we need somebody to lead the organization.
And if you were to highlight a single accomplishment that you're most proud of, what would you say?
I think when we were championing indigenous people's rights in the way that we want to defend our lands, we're able to convince a number of local governments in the Philippines not to allow mining to happen in indigenous territories when communities are against it. So with that, no mining company have started to open in the Cordillera since.
That's an incredible accomplishment, we have to say, really. So there has been no new mining projects.
No new mining company that has started, in spite of all the efforts to try to. But I think the other one is also the building of solidarity of indigenous peoples in Asia and across the world. This is really important for us to be working together because we have common issues. We have common companies, for example, common industries that are really destroying our resources and our territories, or trying to break us or even divide us. So it's important that we keep our solidarity strong, because that really gives us strength. And with that, I believe that globally we have generated more attention. We were able to have the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples adopted by the UN after so many years of fighting for having that kind of international human rights law, because we're being ignored in our own country.
Joanne, I know the Philippines has protections of indigenous people's rights in their constitution,
Yes.
but it is one of the most dangerous places in the world for land and environmental defenders, especially for indigenous activists. So where does that disconnect happen between the law and the actual situations?
You're right that we actually have one of the most progressive law on the rights of indigenous peoples. In fact, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, which is the law in the Philippines, was adopted even before the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was adopted. And that was because of the strong movements of indigenous peoples in the country. The problem is the implementation, because the political power has not changed. The political power remains in the hands of those with economic and political interest to dominate. So even if we have the law, they're twisting the law to serve their interest. So for example, we have a clear requirement for the free, prior, and informed consent for every activity that affects us in our territories. They're what we call their engineering now, the consent. One case is the law requires that the decision-making body, the traditional decision-making body, should be the one to provide consent in consultation with the members. One company, what they did was to form their own so-called council of leaders to get the consent of that council of leaders. So they asked these people to sign a document and submitted it that was the consent. But that was completely fake. It's not coming from the true leaders. And because the ones who approved and say, okay, this is right, are also the people with vested interest. So even if there were strong protests saying that that is not our consent, and they still proceeded. So it's really a question that I think it's a big realization that law is not enough. We need, that is part of an enabling environment, but we need the empowerment, the real empowerment of the rights holders, that they are actually the ones who participate and matter in decision making. We need to change the political balance in the country. Because if there's no democracy where people can participate in decision making, where laws are really implemented properly, and those that are violating those laws are made to account, then it will not make the change. So we need also a strong accountability mechanism, that those that are violating laws should be accountable. And unless we do that, they can get away with it. That's why we have all these killings happening. That's why attacks to indigenous peoples who are defending our rights, who are saying we have the right, this is the law is saying this. They don't give a shit, right? Because they have the power. They can get away with it. The politicians, the military is behind them, and even use the military. A lot of the attacks to indigenous peoples are actually by the military.
They legitimize their
Yes.
attacks and their abuse by saying you're terrorists.
Yes.
How do you counter this? How do you try to navigate this?
It's really tough because they also, unfortunately, take control of the media, where that kind of narrative is shown to the public. So we need to raise our voices, and we need to solidify also our work, and also work with others. We work with lawyers, we also work with journalists, because they play a critical role in countering this narrative by telling the truth. We need people to tell the truth. We need other sectors, influential, like church leaders, for example. They're really influential because we're a Christian country. And when they speak to support us, that matters. So that's the way we're trying to counter that narrative, that it's not only us telling the truth, but also other sectors are telling the truth, that we are not terrorists. We are actually the ones protecting the environment. We are actually the ones enriching society with our cultures and with our values.
And in facing these threats, violence, dangers, how do you stay resilient? And when you see others being scared away from your cause?
In spite of the fear, many are still standing up. Many are still telling us you're doing the right thing. And many are also, we have support mechanisms like human rights lawyers saying, we will support you. We can provide some protection mechanisms. So we try to set up like protection mechanisms. I remember when I was facing serious threats, my group, the media that knows me and support my work, they gave me a hotline. They said, call this number and keep this number in your pocket, give it to your friend or anyone. Just give this number. If something happens to you, we will make sure we will mobilize support. So, you know, that kind of network of support, it's important, right? And also a group of lawyers saying, here's our hotline number, call us anytime. And so that's what we're trying to do, to mobilize other sectors, to provide also the security. A lot of churches also offered sanctuary to those that are at risk. They're opening their churches, their parishes, for people to stay, and they will provide it with security.
And are these churches and institutions then faced with pushback, negative pushback?
Yes, unfortunately, a lot of now are some church leaders are under attack, journalists are under attack, lawyers are under attack. One of the judges that made a clear ruling against saying that these are not terrorists, those that were accused of murder, etc., she was killed. So that impunity, right, that this empowering action is still happening. That's why we need to counter this, and at the national level, but also at the international level. People should know that the situation in the country is really as bad as people getting killed without anything happening to those that are. If the global community will stand up and say, this is not acceptable.
But looking at the struggles that indigenous peoples face across the globe, what are the most common struggles, would you say?
Land grabbing. Land grabbing is really, and we're expecting it to get worse with the transition minerals and the just transition, which is going to, from fossil fuel to renewable energy, which we, of course, support.
The minerals needed to provide
minerals,
transition.
Transition minerals, it's called. These are lithium, nickel, cobalt, to develop e-batteries. So you need that one, and also the solar farms, windmill farms, which are land intensive. And It's again indigenous peoples' territories that are targeted for this renewable energy material. Development, and also the mining of transition minerals, because it's around 60 even to 70% of known transition minerals are in indigenous territories or nearby. So you can already imagine that if these are going to be undertaken without consultation, without our participation in decision making, without our consent, then there's just going to be conflicts all over the place. There's going to be massive environmental destruction because of this mining, but also the loss of livelihood. We will lose our livelihood. We will lose our culture. It's for us. It's a question already of collective survival.
And
if this will proceed in like business as usual.
And it's a paradox because the green
Yes.
transition is much needed, and one of your focuses has been including indigenous peoples in this transition. But what can the rest of the world learn from indigenous peoples' perspectives when we are to live more sustainably?
We cannot already continue with this unsustainable production and consumption. Indigenous people's lives are very simple because we always think of the future. So we only take resources that we need now and ensure that the future generation has something to use, right? So that's the very essence of sustainability, that you only use what you need and that you also make sure that the future has something to live on. Now, if we look at, for example, this whole issue of the transition or the just transition or the green energy, we need to also look into the issue of recycling. We need to recycle already. We just don't keep on producing and mining because that's not going to be sustainable. So we need to look at the recycling of metals, the efficiency, the use of energy, because at the moment we're actually wasting a lot of energy, and the drive for more energy is actually a very unsustainable lifestyle that is causing this drive for additional energy. Unless we question that, we will not be able to sustain the planet. So we need to rethink. We need to rethink now. How are we going to survive with this escalating impact of climate change? And yet we're not learning. The polluters are not made to account. We're not changing the very extractive orientation of how we produce and consume things. We're threatening the very base of our food, the food security, because it's agribusiness still. It's all the use of all these chemicals. If we don't look at the whole economic system and political system that we are in now, that's driving this crisis and making all these plans that are actually not really sustainable and not ensuring social equity. Because if we, like I said, if we proceed with this approach to the just transition, we will again be made to sacrifice. Why is it that logging companies continue to destroy the forest, and when we go to use the forest to get herbal medicine, we are criminalized, we end up in jail? That's the equation, and if we don't change that, then there is no justice, there is no social equity, and there's no sustainability. This world will collapse.
But how would you like the indigenous people's perspective to be included in a just green transition?
Well, the thing is for these actors to listen to us, to ensure that our rights are respected, that the land they want to use is the land that we have been protecting not only for ourselves but for the future. So they're the ones needing it, not. So it's a basic respect, right? It's basic respect. If somebody like you wants to enter my house, you just don't barge in and get my banana or my coffee, right? You asked me, can I take your? Isn't it? That's what we want. People should also respect us and to acknowledge that we have knowledge that can be used. So, for example, if they want to build a renewable energy in our community, then if they asked us, we said, okay, what is that for? What is that for? Is that needed? Do we get the energy? And if it's so, where do you want to put it? Because if we feel like we benefit from it, there's no environmental impact, let's decide, okay, where will we set it up that will not have adverse impacts to our culture, to our livelihood? And then what benefits do we get? Because we also need, our children also need to go to school. We also need health, and it's not given. And if that is part of the discussion, then we're treated in a way that we also matter, that our needs are also taken into account, that our perspective are also taken into account.
It can be combined.
Yeah,
yes.
it can be, and it can be done, because I'm telling you, there are already existing models of renewable energy led and managed by Indigenous peoples. And there are in partnerships, even with the private sector, even with governments, but it is anchored on the respect for our rights, on our meaningful participation in decision making, anchored also in providing for our needs.
And at the base of this is, of course, the issue that was mentioned at a climate conference recently, that the people that are least responsible for driving climate change are the ones that have to suffer the most for the green transition.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And at a recent climate change, the importance of Indigenous peoples was recognized for the biodiversity actions. But what are your hopes for how this could shape global conversation efforts?
The Global Agreement for the Protection of Biodiversity Conservation provides for the respect of our rights, especially to our customary lands. And our hope is that governments will now integrate that into national laws and policies and provide for the measures to really implement that, including the resources, because we also need resources to be able to continue the protection of our biodiversity. But finally, that should also lead to actual and genuine partnerships with Indigenous peoples in the way we protect the environment, in the way we implement our values of reciprocity, of living in harmony with nature, in providing for food and the needs of the people on the ground.
Thank you immensely for your important work. Joan Carling, Right Livelihood Laureate 2024.